Fight! 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 Fight!
What's up guys, my name is Single Player Nacho, and welcome to the very first exploring vid of its kind. Instead of exploring one video game, we're going to be looking at the entirety of a video game series. This is going to be a weekly series, so don't be shy and comment down below your suggestions. This week we're exploring the Mortal Kombat series. I like to think of the Mortal Kombat games as a benchmark for not only fighting games, but video games that have survived through the decades, going from 2D renders of people wearing costumes to 3D models of whatever this is.
Oh, well.
Let's start from the beginning. The original Mortal Kombat. As you might have already guessed, it's a technical impossibility, is that a word? To be able to move around in 2D space. This goes for Mortal Kombat's 1, 2, and 3. But in order to live up to the title of the video, I thought it'd be a good idea to look at some of the most interesting sprites, levels, and items you may or may not have seen while playing these classics. You might recognize this arena as the very first stage in the very first Mortal Kombat. Picking apart the sprites piece by piece, we're able to focus on separate objects such as the guards, the monks in the audience, the structure above Shang Tsung, and Shang Tsung himself. Perhaps the best piece to look at from the stage is the awesome retro artwork of the mountains in the background, which is the most important piece of the stage that provides a view of the landscape. Now this stage is one of the more gruesome stages in MK1. Known as the pit bottom, our fighters can fight along corpses that fell from the bridge above the stage. The pit stage would go on to have a sequel in Mortal Kombat 2 known as, well, the Pit 2. The Pit 2 had the same bridge and certain death below aspect, but it featured two tiny characters in the background on another bridge. Now the characters don't actually fight, they just sorta stare at each other to death. Perhaps the creepier finds of the bunch when pulling the map apart is the demonic face on one of the pillars. Now that's scary. Mortal Kombat 3 featured a bunch of street environments. This one in particular is called, well, the streets. It's a pretty interesting environment. The usual street pavement and government building and the terrifying Shao Kahn pyramid in the backdrop provide an interesting contrast between fantasy and reality, but the most interesting aspect of this area is the otherwise boring gray building. If you just pull it down little by little, and we start to see the top with Pac-Man figures etched in to serve as Easter eggs. Unfortunately, there isn't a viable process to explore Mortal Kombat 4 or Mortal Kombat X for future reference. So let's move on to Deadly Alliance. Jumping right into the game, the title screen itself is an actual environment. It features hallways, doors, and paths that lead to nowhere. Now there is a legitimate reason why these corridors exist. Once you select an option, a small animation plays that corresponds with the empty corridor. It's a tiny but immersive detail, not bad for a game that's nearly 2 decades old. Now you'll have to excuse me for the pun, but exploring this map in particular was eye candy. You'll understand the pun in a minute, I promise. The secrets aren't always outside the map or hidden out of view. However, if you look down close enough, you'll see what I like to call mirror models. Once you've joined the mirror models in their own dimension, or the upside down, you'll see that they aren't only reflections but fully 3D placeholder models. I literally jumped at this find, not with fear, but of how freaking awesome it is seeing them.
Excellent.
Now if you were paying attention during the beginning of this segment, you remembered I made an eyeball pun. Well, here's why. After zooming out of the map, traveling through space and time, you'll see that the map begins to assume the form of a blue eyeball. Move to a farther side view of the map and you'll see the little string thing attached to the nucleus of the eyeball. It's actually called an optic nerve. Thanks, brain. Now moving on to the next arena, there's something ridiculous about the fact that a game made in 2002 has so much more immersion that you can't even see than in some AAA titles nowadays. While looking around, I noticed the path, which is fully rendered, that leads to the arena where the fighters have their fight. It's a perfectly carved route from point A to point B. It's almost like looking at the driving directions that these fighters take in order to get to their, daily fight. Now I was genuinely surprised when I found this. Oh yeah, and more mirror bottles. The fire pit arena features a gigantic Goro statue hidden away in the background. The problem with the forced camera angle is that, well, Goro's statue is turned away from the fight. He and his 4 dicks have had enough of the fighting. Look, the point is, we can't see his face. Now, sadly, there isn't any render of the statue's face at all. It's sort of split in two, with one side being completely empty. Now the next arena is full of mountains and towers and high places. Besides the obvious star of the show, Drum Man, the map is very dense in scale, and I'll show you in a second. First, let's give Drum Guy his 15 minutes of fame.
Excellent.
The towers on the mountains are somewhat 3D. The background of the mountains are pretty much made out of cardboard. But what was the most intriguing of this arena was the vastness of empty space. There's no side quest while fighting in a fighting game, so why is this empty environment left out? Regardless, it's quite amazing to see up close. The Deadly Alliance crypt also shares some of that same vastness, but there is another crypt from another Mortal Kombat title that has much more in it. Let's move on to Mortal Kombat Deception. The crypt here famously has retired, dead, or randomly generated fighters stalk the player while trying to unlock some of the tombstones. Even with the helping hand of the free cam, they're still quite hard to catch. Here are some of the highlights.
Oh, very nice.
What the? You're the only one with the devil of the butt! Ha! Yeah, they're pretty shy. Besides the secret characters, there's one other interesting detail underneath the crypt. Placeholder numbers are scattered throughout the map. These numbers replace the golden numbers on the tombstones after buying the contents in them. I gotta come clean, guys. Mortal Kombat Deception is probably my favorite of the series. Now that being said, there are some funny or otherwise faulty technical limitations that I'll get to in a bit. But first, the funny. When you're fighting your opponent, you don't see the opposite side of their face until it's turned towards the camera. I assume that developers use this to their advantage to not suffocate the game in memory. So by zooming into their faces on the opposite side, they sort of melt. Check out Goro's eyes. They pop out every now and then. Melina's face is also something of a technical limitation. I've always wanted to see Melina's mouth up close for, video purposes. Her spiked up pearly whites are actually there when zoomed in, but by God does it look atrocious. Crispy! Now this goes for faces that we can't see when they're being ripped open or desecrated in any way imaginable. They're just sort of static. I also knew from the get-go that I wanted to see Noob and Smoke switch from afar. It's not very immersive. They appear and just sort of disappear whenever prompted. Now that's the funny stuff. Here's where the limitations get more technical. Whatever backdrops, props, or characters aren't in the player's field of view, they disappear. Watch this example. This is a method of saving up memory, so there's no real criticism there. In fact, none of these examples are criticisms as well. It's just kind of funny. So with that out of the way, let's watch Sub-Zero fall from this tower from afar as perpetrated by his own brother. Jesus. Speaking of large falls, the pit makes its comeback in Deception. The pit's bottom doesn't fall far from the tree, another pun, as it also shares the same creepy corpses impaled on spikes. If you stare at the moon long enough, chances are you'll see a figure floating across it. Even with the free cam mod, still to this day, nothing has proven to me whether or not that this is a witch on a broom or a dragon. Now it's obviously a witch, but I'm a dragon truther. Now let's watch the pit death from afar. Take it away, Scorpion. The very last arena I explored was the bipolar beach, as I like to call it. One minute it's day and tropical, the next minute it's night and nightmare fuel. The sand snakes, Game of Thrones reference, are pretty scary to look at as far as their transformation goes. I knew the most interesting thing to do on this map was to see how the skyboxes change rapidly from day to night from a long distance. Check this out. Now I also wanted to see the piranhas kill something for fun, so check this out as well. Take it away, Scorpion. Alright, so we're moving on to Mortal Kombat Armageddon, which was pretty much a reskin of Deception. Right off the bat, the intro, and I mean a video of the intro, is an environment. We're basically in a movie theater. I tried going through the screen to see what would happen, and the screen was flipped from the other side. Now this also happens for the title screen as well. This segment is what I like to call the Goro meat bag. I tested out some of the various arena deaths, and most didn't reveal anything new or exciting to make the cut, but this arena death in particular, where Goro is running on a treadmill, death mill I like to call it, he's out of luck and becomes bits of himself, but underneath the death, it seems as though the model's body parts are quickly stored below the map. It's gross, but convenient. Now we're moving on to Goro's Lair Arena. You'll see how relational Mortal Kombat Armageddon is to Deadly Alliance. Somehow, mirror models are back. They made the jump from one game onto Armageddon, which was released 4 years after Deadly Alliance. Now one thing Armageddon has though are arena death traps. You ever wonder what a fat drunk looks like when he's being catapulted to the other side of the map? Well, here's how the original version works. Now here's what we would see from afar. Oh my god, that's a big ass fireball. Now all jokes aside, fireballs or meteors in this arena are actually quite the sight. This map in general is incredibly dense. The hail of meteors are amazing to see up close. If we zoom out enough, you can see how strangely enormous it is. It features cave structures that lead to nowhere and depths that just keep going and going. Khan's arena is a death trap haven, but perhaps even more interesting is the render of Khan himself. It's an adequate 3D model to say the least. This is what Shao Kahn sees from atop his throne. Besides Khan, there's also prisoners up for display. Their faces are terrifying to say the least. What the hell has Shao Kahn been doing to these people? Shao Kahn's model is amazing compared to the audience in the background. Sure, from a long distance they give off the impression of a rowdy crowd, but up close they're hardly recognizable. They're pretty much a few pixels jumping up and down. This whole time, no one was actually watching Mortal Kombat. And that's my theory. The last notable arena in Armageddon is the Evil Tower. First off, this creepy ass floating priest actually has a face. It's barely a face, but meh, still a face. But the best part of this map is the tsunami-like portal in the back. Get the fuck back there. In the game, the object serves as a portal, but in the development side of things, the closest thing I could relate to it is a black hole of sorts. Watch closely as we enter the portal and what happens to the environment behind it. Now let's push this dude in. Now the very last Mortal Kombat game we're going to explore is Mortal Kombat, which is technically Mortal Kombat 9. The crypt in MK9 is huge in terms of improvement from the last iterations. It features 4 different lands of their own: the Deadlands, Meadow of Despair, Hollow of Infestation, and Blood Marsh. Each of these lands feature their own unique torture victims or straight up corpses. These guys really look like they can use a Snickers. This one in particular has his face hidden. Surely enough, inside the torture casket is a beautiful, beautiful face. He has feet too, which I'm very happy about. There are several torture victims spread throughout the crypt waiting for death, and you reap the benefit of extra costumes and content. This crypt is the pinnacle of them all, with unique violent themes sprinkled here and there, whether it's corpses with alien babies hanging from the tree, or corpses chilling in the red pool. There's no telling where the sense of despair truly ends. The Deadpool makes a triumphant return to form with even more grotesque figures waiting to start swimming across the acid. This time though, we get to see the procedure. These 2 hunks are the perpetrators behind the acid death trap, and these poor victims can only watch. Well, they're watching a fight before they die. At least you're being entertained. Once these fighters move into the view of the operators, they begin lowering their victim into the acid. Once inside the acid, a very tricky trick occurs. The body is simply switched up and replaced by a melted human corpse, while the actor gets to chill out and wait for resurrection. Nevertheless, these 3D models are fantastically grotesque. Another returning area is the pit bottom, where, as I've said before, all the magic happens. This pit bottom is filled with impaled corpses, but now they serve as nutrition to these Moloch-looking characters. These guys are actually vegan, so they simply pretend to eat the rotting flesh. The map is absolutely filled with corpses left and right. It's hard to find one section without any limbs or skeletons lying around. If we go above the map, there should be a bridge where these corpses came from, but there isn't a bridge actually rendered. Once we start to zoom out, you can start to see how big the jump from MK Armageddon to MK9 is in terms of scale and technology. When we do load up the pit arena that features a bridge, the Landmark II fighters fighting behind the actual fight returns. These two characters are sometimes swapped out for random fighters, and if you look up close, they're only play fighting pussies. Now if we travel below the bridge, passing the pillars filled with, again, impaled corpses, we will reach the pit's bottom, and things haven't changed much since we last visited the map. One thing that did sort of fascinate me was the grim lighting down here. It makes the scene look very different and unique. Besides that, there are two corridors on the bridge where our characters fight, and unfortunately there's no room or end actually there. We focused on meteors and fireballs before, but it's still magnificent to see up close, especially with MK9's graphics. The street arena also returns in Mortal Kombat 9, although this time it's more of a scene straight out of the Fast and Furious series rather than a Mortal Kombat arena. Speeding cars will regularly pop out of the blue and attempt to run over the players. These things pop out of nowhere and head into nowhere. Now there was one car that randomly popped up and drove toward an empty part of the game, as well as a helicopter crashing into the water. This made me feel like I was playing Grand Theft Auto, except for the fact that there was a big ass monster wreaking havoc. A close-up of the monster reveals that it actually isn't hurting any of the soldiers and is actually a giant sweetheart. The soldiers' guns fire bombs somehow, I guess through grenade launchers, but the renderings do seem a little off. Watch out, Call of Duty. Zooming out of the map gives us a beautiful chaotic landscape of a burning and destroyed city. Beautiful. Yet another iconic Mortal Kombat map makes its return, the Courtyard. This arena isn't very different from its predecessor. There's the monks eagerly waiting to see blood. The guards are still here making sure everything's in check. They don't have feet though, so how are they gonna guard anything? Behind it all is Shang Tsung, who watches the fight intently. Aside from the brutal shit that goes down in this game, the backdrop looks ironically peaceful. The sun's rays hit the water ever so gently, creating a glowy-like effect. But fuck that! These monks want to see blood. So much so that they meticulously follow the fighters' every move, and when they land a hit, they clap very loudly. Check these psychos out. The last arena worth exploring is Goro's lair. Well, because Goro. But what's happening behind the scenes in this map is very strange. For one, we have a few of these Moloch characters, but further behind is one of the most intense chase scenes I have ever witnessed. One of those torture persons is chasing one of the poor Moloch dudes. It's pretty sad to see, actually. These two run back and forth to no end and spawn indefinitely. The chase scene is good and all, but I did find something very unique. The lighting above Goro's head isn't simply lighting. Sure, there's a grate that acts as a layout for the lighting, but the actual source is a picture of the original courtyard. It seems as though the devs attached a light source to a render of a random picture and said, fuck it, no one's gonna see this. Well, there you have it. With that being said, MK9 isn't a perfect game either. I did find some pretty hilarious glitches while using the free cam. The dragon in this background looks menacing, terrifying, and most importantly, rendered, but if we take a closer look, it actually looks like a Unity render. The detail fades away more and more, and we're left with an albino dragon from the year 2006, but if we flip back to a longer distance, it gives us the illusion of better rendering. I am legitimately puzzled as to how this works. Now, aside from that, character intros aren't being communicated fighter to fighter. Instead, the fighter is threatening him or herself. It's actually pretty hilarious.
Safety's disabled. Combat mode engaged.
Well, that does it for this journey of a video. We explored 7 different Mortal Kombat games at once. I hope you learned something today. Thank you for watching. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on this new episode format, so comment down below your opinions and suggestions for other games you'd like me to explore. This video would never be possible without the modders and the people behind the DOLPHIN emulator, so thank you guys so much. Don't forget to subscribe and like, and as always, stay single.
It's official. You suck.